let's start with today's session. So today we are going to see about triggers. So trigger concept in Salesforce actually. So what is an Apex trigger if you see? Actually that is also a code, Apex code, which is written which will get triggered based on DML events. So what are the DML events if you see? Insert, update, delete. So these are all called as the DML events in Salesforce. So actually, uh, yes, sir, to be very simple actually. So this this Apex code would be little different from what we saw until yesterday. So the custom controller Apex class we wrote, right? That was the proper structured link class. On the Apex class, public class name, inside that variable declaration method, inside that method we have written our logic. Then that method is called when on clicking of a button, those and all were there, right? But this trigger, it is actually a little different. The syntax should be a little different, but this is also an Apex code. But here, the syntax, structure, everything would look different, and you will write a trigger on every particular object. The fine, it is always a best practice to have only one trigger on an object. At the object level, you will be writing one trigger. I will be showing it where to go and write that trigger. So why what is the necessity for going for triggers actually? If you see, we have seen certain automation features in Salesforce like workflows and approval process, right? So when we are seeing that, have you seen, do you remember the first step in workflows and approval processes? You will have to select on which object you are going to fire the workflow, on which object you are going to do the approval process, correct? So it is actually both workflows and approval process are object centric, object specific. On any one particular object only you will be able to do that. Okay. So if I have one condition on object A, I want to do some changes on object B. Is it possible to do using workflows? It is not. If you are making some changes on the same object A, if I'm making some changes on one section of the field, then in other section I can make the changes, but everything is limited to that particular single object. But there would be some scenarios where in which if I make some changes on the parent object, I want the child objects to get reflected. So I might have to, let's assume that we are maintaining the parts list in one table. Among the parts, there are few parts which needs to get approval from the supervisor. So those parts are called restricted parts. So that is maintained in a separate table. When a customer comes and asks for a quotation for any particular part, the system has to search in for both the tables. First, it has to search in for the table A to find whether the part is there or not. Then, if at all if it is there, we will have to check whether it is a restricted part or not, and that is being maintained in another table. These two tables has relationship among them. So every time when a customer asks for a quotation, the system has to search in for the two tables. First in table A and another in next time in table B. If it is in table B, then the notification has to be sent immediately, like it has to be checked with the supervisor. If not, then we can give the quotation to the customer. So in such scenarios, it is not possible to go with the standard functionalities which Salesforce has provided like workflows. Then we will be going in for triggers. So without manual intervention, if you want some action to be triggered based on the DML events like insert, there might be some event. When I insert a record on any particular object, I want certain actions to happen. When I update an object, when I update a record on any particular object, I want certain actions to happen. So in such scenarios, we can go for Apex triggers actually. Fine. So example would be like on the employee object, every time if we'll have to check if at all if he's a permanent employee, then the checkbox needs to be enabled. Fine. On orange, let's take this case. If I create one account, automatically a case should be created. If I create an account, then automatically a contact should be created. If I update the primary account details, then primary account billing details, then all the sister shipping details should be get changed. If I change the shipping address of my account, then all the related contacts of that account shipping address also should be changed, or the billing address should be changed. Fine. Like this, interdependent, like based on if something happens on object A, then the change needs to be reflected on object B. Like this, if at all if you have any interdependency on this triggers, you can write it on the, you can make the impact on the same object, either on the same object or on different objects. Both are possible. Fine. But the flexibility of the triggers to make the changes on the another object is the main advantage of going for triggers actually. Fine. So this is actually one limitation in our standard feature. So to overcome that, we are going for triggers. So what is a trigger? If you see, as I said, it is also an Apex code, but it will have a different structure, different syntax, different format, and it is like you will be going and writing on the object level. We have seen object detail page, right? Whenever you are creating an object, after finishing it will take us to the object detail page. Or else, even if you click on open any object, you can choose to view the fields of that particular object, so that if once you click on that, it will take to that particular object, right? So that is called as object detail page. There we where we will be creating new fields, validation rules, page layouts, those things, and also underneath, if you drill down, you will be able to find one area, one section called triggers. So there only we will be writing triggers. If I want to write a trigger on account object, then I'll be going in for object detail page of the account, and then I'll be writing the trigger. Fine. So this is a small overview. What is an Apex trigger? Why should we go for an Apex trigger? What are the limitations of the standard functionalities provided in Salesforce? And to overcome that, only we are going for this concept. So here the syntax, if you see, trigger, trigger name, on which object, and then we will be going in for events. So I'll explain what is an event actually. So we'll be saying that shortly. So this is actually the syntax of the any trigger. So simple example would be trigger, fine. So trigger, trigger name, on which object you are going to write a trigger, and about events. So trigger, trigger name, this you can give anything, on account object. So these are all the events. So when I want my trigger to get fired, so before, when I insert any record on my object, and whenever I update, before doing my update, I want my piece of code to be executed. Fine. So if you look at the events, so there are some trigger events which we call. So you can fire the trigger before any DML operation or after DML operation. So before insert, after insert, before update, after update, before delete, after delete. Either before performing any DML operation or after performing the DML operation. So before insertion of any record, I want a piece of code to be executed. Before, after insertion of a record, I want my piece of code to be executed. In Salesforce, I would have told already, I remember, when you are creating a new record on Salesforce, what will you do? You will go click on a tab, click on new record, and then you will be typing in the values, and then you will click on save, correct? So once you click on save, the one which is for you it is visible as active. So after you click on save, the data is getting saved and you are able to view the record detail page. Correct. But in the back end, when you soon after you click on save, in the back end, Salesforce executes a sequence of steps, which we call it as execution of steps. Okay. In the next session, I will be explaining about test classes and the significance of test class. What is a test class? What is the need for a developer in a Salesforce to create a test class? Everything I will be showing it, and after that I will be explaining the mechanisms of moving to production (MTP). Okay. So what is a change set components application regarding sandboxes production? How to move from sandbox to production? That moving to production thing I will be explaining. After that, there I will be explaining one more concept called forward. Okay. So there are three. So either before any DML operation or after the DML operation. Fine. This was what I was about to tell. So after explaining that moving to production thing, I'll explain what is the execution steps which is happening in the background soon after you click on save actually. So that is knowledge which a developer or an administrator need to have in Salesforce, because in the background soon after you click on save, once the old record will be saved from the database. If you are, let us assume like if you are updating any record, old record will be updated from the database. Then it will check for any validation rule. Then it will check for before trigger. Then your database will get saved, but it will not get commit from the database. Only its save will happen. Then after that, it will check for escalation rule, auto response rule, assignment rule, workflows, approval process. Then it will check for any after trigger. Everything will check. Then after that, it will finally only it will commit from the database. That sequence of steps it will happen. So one by one, the system will start executing, and finally only your records will get saved and committed from the database. Then after that only you will be able to see the product detail page. Fine. So this after trigger, before trigger happens before or after the DML operations. So whether you can do some actions before updating any record on any particular object, or you might there might be scenarios where they would require you to perform some actions or fire or trigger some actions after updating a record on any particular object. So I might happen like for us, for instance, what we are going to see today is like on account object. What I'm going to do is I will make some changes on the phone. There is a field called phone. Correct. For every account, there will be a phone number field. The same way, contact object will also have a phone number field. Account and contact are related to each other. So one account can have many contacts. So what I'm going to do is, if I make a change on account object, if I make a change on the phone number field in account object, all the related contacts phone number field should be changed. Fine. So there also I don't want all the contacts. In contact I have primary contact, secondary contact. I have differentiated my contacts as primary, secondary. So I have kept one custom field to differentiate this. So using this field, I am segregating my contacts as primary contact and secondary contact. So what will I be doing if you see uh, from the uh, so if I make any change on the phone number field in the account object, I want only my primary contacts phone number field to get changed. So let's assume like on account object, for one account I have some 10 contacts. Of the 10 contacts, only 5 contacts are primary contacts, the remaining contacts are secondary. So if I make any change for the phone number field on the account object, only the 5 primary contacts which are related to that particular account phone number field should get updated. Fine. So because for one account, in contact object, if you see, there will be many contacts. But for one particular account, for Airtel, if you see, for Tata Consultancy, for TCS, there will be only few contacts. So I want the account related contacts to get updated, not all the contacts on the contact object. So in such scenarios and all, we will be going for triggers. So these are called as the trigger events. So either you can insert before or after the DML events. So this syntax or the structure of the trigger would be like this: trigger name, on which object you are going to write the trigger events. So an example would be trigger account update on account before insert before update. Inside this you will be writing the trigger. Next, if you see, there are certain methods which are used in Salesforce for triggers. So also there is one small clue. When will you going for say? Okay, now there might be a question for you. Like if a scenario has been given, you might ask, uh, in which instances I'll be going for before trigger, and in which instances I'll be going for after trigger. You might have a question. So there is one small clue. This is not a thumb rule, but you can make this in most of the real-time scenarios. This has worked. So based on that, I have given this. So if at all, if there is a requirement wherein which you are being asked to play around with one single object, then going for before insert. Fine. So if you are asked to if at all if your requirement is like this, as I told, if you make some changes on object A, then changes should be reflected in another object or object B. If two or more than two objects are involved, then in such a case you will go in for after insert. So blindly you can go. So if they ask, if I make some changes on account, I want contact to be contact phone number fields or contact fields to be updated, then in such case, obviously I will have to go for after update. So my trigger is going to be an account object, and the trigger event is after update. So if you have finalized this section actually, then 30 to 40% of the trigger is almost done. So because the confusion will happen when starting with the trigger, whether to go in for before triggers or for after triggers, right? So if your requirement is if I every time if I make if I insert a record on the employee, then some fields should need to be updated on the same object. Then before insert, every time if I when a record is inserted on opportunity, and I want to check whether the opportunity amount value is less than 3,000. If it is less than 3,000, then I need to throw in the error message, like opportunity amount cannot be less than 3,000. Like that, if I want to check some validations, if I want to perform updations on the same object, in with whatever object you are writing the trigger, if I want to make the changes on the same object itself, then you will be going for before trigger, either before insert, before update, or before delete. Or the other one is, like, if you want to make any changes on one particular object, the changes need to be reflected in another object. In such scenarios, then you will be going for after insert, after update, or after delete. Fine. So these are all the things. So next, if you see, there are certain methods in Salesforce which for triggers which you can make use of. One is like trigger.new. Trigger.new, it is actually a list. So we have seen what is a list. You are now quite aware of what is a list now, right? So it is a collection which can hold a group of variables, ordered collection which can allow duplicate values. Fine. So here in trigger, when you are writing a trigger for any particular object, you can make use of this trigger.new. So it is actually a list which will have a group of records. So what it is going to hold, if you see, it will hold the new values. For example, let's assume on on account object, on employee object, we have one field called name. Fine. So initially the name was Delanta. Okay, and you are changing the name from Delanta to Ganesh. So earlier it was Delanta. Now it has been changed to Ganesh. So now if you put trigger.old in that particular object, then it will have Ganesh, sorry, Delanta. The old record was, first record was Delanta, right? So now it has been changed to Ganesh. So trigger.new will be Ganesh, trigger.old will be Delanta. Like this, you can have group of records. What are all the values, what are all the old values which are being changed from Delanta to Ganesh, from Ganesh to again some other name if it has been changed, then trigger.old will have contain all the old values. So that's what they have written it here. So trigger.new, it is actually a list of subject records which is going to hold new values. And there is also one clue here based on the real-time requirements or scenarios. So you can use this trigger.new for inserting. When you are inserting a new record, you can use this actually trigger.new, right? This trigger.old is actually used. So which records you will delete from the system, or the ones which you don't want or which are already present in the system, or the old records, correct? So this trigger.old is normally used for deleting a record actually. And that is also a trigger.hold is also a list which is going to hold a list of a subject record and which will hold the old values or old instances of the values, right? So what is the need? Why should we go for? We have already seen what is a list set map. Already we have list. Then why should we again learn this trigger.new and apply this and use this? Instead of this, we can go in for list itself. You can ask. So that is actually a valid question. But then why is because like if you are using a list, then you will have to declare a list. Yesterday we have written one custom controller for Apex class, right? We have first declared the list, initialized the list, then we have queried it and gave the values of that query to that list. So we have used three lines, correct? So if we are using trigger.new, fine. If we are using trigger.new or trigger.old, then there is no need of three lines actually. We can straightly directly make use of it using trigger.new. That's all. So already the declaration initialization has been done by Salesforce itself in the backend. So instead of declaring a list, for example, let's assume like you are working on employee object. Then instead of creating a list for employee, list of the data type employee double underscore C, a list name EMP list is equal to new list of employee. Or first you will have to create for putting on getter setter, then you will have to write in first. So you will have to make it as two lines, and then after that the third line only you can initialize or give some values to that list actually. So instead of two or three lines, Salesforce itself has done the declaration and initialization. So directly I can make use of trigger.new. Usually in triggers you will be looping. Looping will be used. Like yesterday we have not seen for loop, correct? So yeah, here we will be seeing today we will be seeing in practical about for loops, how to use for loops in Salesforce actually. It is also quite different from other languages. So you would have seen from JavaScript to C Sharp, .NET, Java, everywhere you would have seen the for loops as like for C, for I is equal to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. So this would be the normal scenario, correct? So in most of the languages, but then here in Apex it is like quite different. As we are using one more data type called non-primitive data type, we are also using subject data types, correct? So we can use we will be using that account, all standard objects and custom objects we are using it. So when if we want to take the case of trigger itself, so every time when someone inserts a record on employee object, I want some action to be performed. So every time it should perform. So every time in the sense the looping, obviously looping should happen. So I am now playing with an object, S object at the metadata level, and in the database layer, I am touching the object, actually the table. So now in such scenarios, how to apply the looping structures. So that we will be saying today. So the structure or the syntax would be slightly different from the normal for loops. So trigger.new, trigger.old are some special methods which a developer in Salesforce can make use of instead of declaring and initializing a list again. So as I said, like if you're writing a trigger and employee object, instead of declaring a list for that employee object, directly I can make use of trigger.new so that my lines of code will get reduced. Also this trigger.new can be trigger.new or trigger.old. All this can be used only once. Fine, if you have used once in one, we are writing one trigger for employee object. If I have used this trigger.new or trigger.old once, then that's all. After that, I cannot again use that. Fine. So next, if you see trigger context variables. So trigger, there are certain context variables or one few more methods like is insert, is update, is delete. So what I said, the best practice when you are writing triggers is to have or maintain one particular only one trigger for one object. If you are having any object, it is always advisable to have only one trigger. Fine. There might be scenarios wherein which you might be asked to for multiple scenarios would be given on the same particular object. Then also you should find a way to fit all the triggers in one particular object actually. Fine. So if you see, we have methods like trigger.isinsert. So let's take one scenario. On opportunity object, I told one trigger, right? So if at all if the opportunity amount is, when I'm inserting a record, I need to check one condition, like if the amount field is less than 3000, then I should throw one error. Okay. So now after that, the few days there is one more enhancement which is coming, where they are saying like on the same opportunity object, if you are updating any record, if it is insert, if it is less than 3000, it is okay. If you are updating any record, you will have to check whether it is less than 6000 or not. If it is less than 6000, then you will have to throw an error. So they are giving one condition like this. So when you are inserting, there is a separate condition. When you are updating, again there is a separate condition. Like this, if at all while inserting there is a condition which needs to be satisfied. While updating there is one condition which needs to be satisfied. For deleting there is one condition which needs to be satisfied, and the sequence of steps needs to be executed or triggered on the same object. Then in such scenarios we can make use of this trigger context variable. So I can check whether it is a by using trigger.isInsert. If it is insert and if the amount is less than 3000, throw one error. Then one more line. Else if the trigger, if it is update, if it is update and if the amount is less than 6000, throw another error. That's all. Finished. No need to write separate triggers. For insert, before insert one trigger, before update one trigger. Why to have two triggers on the same object? Also, Salesforce recommends to have only one particular one trigger for one object. So, using this trigger context methods, we can make use of that. Right? So these are called trigger context variables. So all these are called the basics of triggers or overview of about triggers. Next, I will give a small brief overview about the looping structures and for loops which are used, because for triggers inevitably we will have to use the for loops. So fine. So this is how the syntax for the for loop in Salesforce. For first you will be using a subject, whether it is a standard object or a custom object, account, contact, lead, employee, lead, PF, list. any S object you will be using, then you will create one instance for that S object. So if this would be any name, so whatever you wish, S, A, B, C, any variable or any name you can give it. So you will have to create one instance for that S object. Then after this, you will have to keep one semicolon. Then after that, you will be using or placing any list name which you have declared or initialized, either list name, set name, map name, or we can use trigger.new or trigger.old. Okay, so here in our scenario, for example, if you take I say here for employee for a subject name, I have created one instance for that a subject. Then I have used trigger.new as it is a list. Then inside that, using this instance, I can refer the fields. Let's assume like the status type or the fields inside the object. This particular object has this field. Then I can access the field using this instance. E dot that particular field is equal to some value. So every time I insert, I perform any action on my particular object, I want this action to be executed. So this would be the case. So like this only we will be using the for loops in Salesforce. Fine. So this is actually a small overview about triggers. What is a trigger? What is the need of a trigger? Why should we going for triggers? What are the complexities or the limitations we have in the standard features in Salesforce? Fine. Let's see some few examples, practical examples for before trigger and after trigger. First, let's see a few examples for before trigger. So using first standard object, then custom object, then we'll start to see after trigger. So if we are making a change on one particular object, I want changes to happen on the second, on the another object. So like that, let's see. So where to go and write a trigger if you see. For standard objects, you will have to go searching for the on the left side search. You will have to find. So first, let's write trigger on the opportunity object before insert before trigger, where the scenario is like this. So every time I insert any record on opportunity object, I will have to check for the opportunity amount. If it is less than 3,000, fine, then I should throw an error. I should not allow my record to be saved, and I should throw my one error stating that the amount value should be greater than 3,000. And then this is actually for before insert. Then again for update, before update, because I'm going to check one more condition, like if the amount is less than 6,000, then it should be saved there. It should not allow. So if it is greater than 6,000 only, it should allow. Fine. So this is another one condition. So let's try writing one on the opportunity object. So where to go and write this particular trigger if you see, click on setup on the left side, click on opportunities. So under opportunities on the left side, build customize opportunities. If you see, you will be able to find one thing called triggers. Fine. So click on that. So here click on new. So once you click on new, see here, automatically it will take you to this object, and by default system itself will give this syntax trigger, what is the name and what is the event. Fine. So what is the name? If you see, so you can give any name. So trigger name on this opportunity. So I'm going to check before insert. Fine. So now after this, so every time I insert any record, so I'll have to use for loop. So in for loop, inside for loop, what we are going to see, if you see, for, so the subject name, correct? So it is actually opportunity only, as it is a standard object. So I'm using the instance for that particular subject as O. So O trigger dot new. So I'll have to check if, fine. So see here, the amount is, the error is being displayed here. So we have one special method called add error in Salesforce. So once you add that method, whatever you write inside that, that will be thrown as an error here. So like we have trigger.new and trigger.old, we have one special method called add error. Fine. So we have used that. So see here, trigger name on which opportunity. So what is the action or event before this trigger should fire? It is actually every time before inserting a new record on opportunity, I want this to be executed. So before insert, after that, for opportunity O, fine. So I have a subject instance I have created. Then after that, I have made use of trigger document. So because for all the new values, so with the all only new values will be inserted in the system, correct? So with that trigger dot new. So I am checking if the amount is, so amount is actually a field inside opportunity. So to access that, I'll be using O dot amount. Using this instance, I'll be referring to the field. So if it is less than 3000, then using the same thing, I'm accessing the method which is already written by Salesforce. So using that method, if I just type in the message, the amount is less than opportunity amount, whatever error message, then If I try to create a new record on the opportunity record and then I'm trying to save it, then it will show this error. Fine. So now if I'm going to change it to actually fine, then it will allow me to save the record without any hindrances. So this is actually one trigger. Okay, so now this is fine. So if we are inserting any new record, it should check, the system should check for the amount field, and if it is less than 3000, it should trigger this thing. Now what I'm saying is like one more thing, if every time if I'm going to update any record on the opportunity object, I will have to check for another condition, wherein which I'll have to check if whether the opportunity amount is less than 5000 or 6000 or not. And then if it is so, then I'll have to throw another error on the same object but for a different event and for different condition. So instead of going for another new trigger, in the same trigger itself we can enhance it. How, if you see, by making use of the trigger context variables. We have seen one thing called trigger context variables, correct? So trigger dot is insert, is update, is delete. So using those things, we are going to enhance the same trigger itself. We are going to extend the same trigger itself instead of going for a new one. So how to do that? Let's see. So here I will be giving it as before update. So now here, if fine. So a simple example for before triggers on the opportunity object where the changes are going to happen in the same object. So like this, if the trigger, if it is trigger dot is insert and the amount if is less than 3000, I am going to throw this error. If it is before update and if the amount is less than 6000, then I am going to throw this particular error. And so now let's try editing the same record, then check. Um, See here, if I am already existing any opportunity and if I am changing the amount value and if it is less than 6000, then it will throw this error. Fine. So if it is like more than 2, then it will allow me to save the record. So now here, let's try with one more new record. So for the new opportunity, if it is less than 3000, it will throw error. Right? For the same record, if if it is less than 6000, then it will throw this error. So while inserting one error, and while updating, it is going to check for one record, and if it is going to less than that, then it will throw another error. So this is one simple example for before trigger on opportunity object. Next, let's see one before trigger on our custom object. So we have employee leave is there, right? So every time I am inserting a new record on this particular object, I want my checkbox to be enabled, and I want this pick list field to be permanent. Okay, always before after inserting a new record, I want these two things to happen. Fine. So how can this be made? If you see, you can ask, is this not possible using workflow? Because every time you are going to give one condition, like if I create a record, so make this true and give this as like this. Using workflow itself, I can do. Why should I go for a trigger? So in workflows, do you remember, like you will have to give one condition. Mandatorily, it is compulsory that you have to give at least one condition there. So now my requirement is like without having any condition. So every time I insert, there is no condition here. So every time I insert a record on this particular object, I want these two things to happen. So for that, there is no option in workflows. You will have to give any one condition, then only you can proceed further. So now I'm asking without any condition I want to do. So then that is not possible over there. So we will have to go in for the triggers concept. Fine. So here, so how to do this if you see? So go to object. So this is the object detail page. Come down under validation rules, you will have triggers. So click on new, it will take you to this particular object. So here it will show trigger name, on which object you are going to write, and trigger events. Fine. So here I'm going to give the trigger name, then on this particular object. So what are the events? If you see, I'm going to have before insert. Fine. So here what I'm going to use, so every time I insert a new record, so I will have to use for loop. So for employee, so I'm going to create one instance for this for loop. After this, I am making use of this trigger.new functionality. Fine. After this, using this instance, I'm going to refer to all the fields. So what are all the fields which are available? So I have to check in for this active. Fine. So what is the active actually? So active, so is equal to, every time when I insert, I have to make it as true. Next, for the next field, what is the thing type actually? So what is the type? If you see, this is the type. So I will have to come in here. So here we have to do this. So fine. So before inserting any record on this particular object, so I am checking whether this is true or not. If it is not, I am making that it as true and the type to be permanent. So after this, if you come here, so I'll be refreshing the page. So if I try to create one record, see here I have not given anything. Right? I have not given anything here. So now if I just click on save, see what happens after it is getting saved. See here automatically the active checkbox was enabled and the type was made permanent. I did not give anything before saving. Let me again disable it. I am giving it as none and then after again I am saving. Now nothing will happen. Why? Because I have updated, right? Our trigger was only before insert. So if I am inserting any new record, that will happen. So if I want every time if I make the changes like that also, if I want that, then I have to make it as store update. Fine. Now if I make any changes, so every time see here automatically this will happen. So without condition I wanted it. So every time I change, even after changing, so when I save it, automatically the trigger runs in the background and then changes and fires the sequence of steps which we have asked the system to perform. Fine. So this is one example for the before trigger. So now let's see one more example for after trigger. So see here on the account object we have a field called phone number, correct? So every account has related contacts. So now I have segregated using like whether it is a primary. See here there is one field to segregate primary, primary. So this is actually a custom field. So I have segregated the contacts as primary and secondary. Fine. So now what is the requirement if you see on the account object I have a field called phone. So if I make any changes to this field, this particular phone number field, fine. So if I make any changes to this particular phone number field on the account object, I have to check whether I have contacts. In that, how many contacts? Who are all the primary contacts? Then for those primary contacts alone, I want whatever phone number I am giving here, I want that to be reflected. I want that to be updated. So to be simple, if I update my account object phone number field, all my related primary contacts phone number field should get updated. So if I make a change on one object, I want the changes to be reflected in another object. So this is actually for this we will have to go it for after triggers. Fine. So we are going to write the trigger on account object. So go to setup, click on account. Under account you will have triggers. Going for triggers and click on new. It will take us to this object actually. So trigger name on which object. So what is the update actually? So after updating, so we are going to update the phone number field of the account object, correct? So after update is the event. After this, I will have to make use of for account A trigger.new. Right. After this, we will have to query the. We will have to create one list because we have already used trigger.new. Whenever you are writing after trigger, you will have to make, because we need the contact, right? So for one account it can have many contacts. So first I will have to query and take the contact actually. What are all the contacts related to this account? As I already told, right? If I make any change for this particular account, only the related contacts for this account should be changed. Only the related primary contacts of this account should be changed. I don't want all the contacts in my contact object or all the primary contacts of my contact object. Only the primary contacts related to this particular account needs to be changed. So for that, I will have to put one query here. For that, I will have to create one list on the second object. So what is the second object here? Contact. So list data type list name is equal to, directly I am writing the query here. So select object names, field name from object name. So now field name from object name, if you see, go to setup. So I have to search for the contact object fields. So on contact object, what fields should I require? If you take, so like contact object, actually the mandatory field is last name. So what is the last name, if you see? So last name. So whenever you are querying on any particular object, you will have to take into consideration what are the mandatory fields. Those fields, even if you don't require, you will have to include it in your query, or else the system will throw error. So likewise, in contact object, the mandatory field is actually the last name. So what is the API name of that? If you see, it is actually the same last name itself. So select last name. So what field we are going to update? Phone number. Correct. So what is the API name of that phone? Actually, it is phone. Fine. Next, if you see, we are going to update the phone number field only for the primary contact. Correct. So what is the API? What is the field name level? So what is the API name of that? If you see, it is actually a custom field. So I am going to use that also from contact. If I just give like this, it will fetch all the records in the contact object. Correct. It will go and fetch all the contact object records and come back. I don't want that to happen. I want only the contacts on my related account. If I have account called A, what are all the primary contacts in that account? I want only that to be fetched. So how to include that, if you see? So here I will be using one where condition. Where for account there is one field called name, correct? So if I can include where name is equal to, so where name is equal to, so Burlington Textiles of America, so that it will fetch only the record for that particular account. So if I am going to give like this, it will work, but it will work only for this account. Every time if it is going to be, it will fetch, it will update. If I am going to make a change for this account, then only the trigger will function. But I don't want that to happen. I want to happen for all accounts. So whatever accounts I am updating, I want that to happen. But if I am writing a query like this, so this is what is called hard coding. So you should not hard code any values or ID on any of your code. So see here, if I'm going to give this account name here, every time this trigger will work only for this particular record on the account object. What I said, always when you're writing a code, you should make a habit to bulkify the trigger, and it should process many number of records ASAP, not for a single record. So now if you write a trigger like this, it will work only for this particular record on the account object. Fine. So to avoid this thing, we are going to do, so we are going to make this as generic. So here we have one thing called, so how account and contact are related, if you see, we have one lookup field, correct, on the child object. On the contact object, if you go and see, there will be a lookup for account. So in the back end, what I said, it is actually in the front end, it is actually shown as lookup for us. For me and you, it is lookup. But in the back end, Salesforce, for Salesforce, if you see, it is actually an ID. So Salesforce saves this as an ID actually. So here, where, so what is the account ID? So it is actually on this field is present on contact actually. So if you are going to search for this here, it will not be available. But if you yesterday we saw a workbench, correct? So if you go to see here, there is one field called account ID. See here, there are 55 records. Totally, if you come and check in account and contact object, there will be 52 records. If I just click on any ID, it will take to the account. See here, this is actually contact object. Fine, correct. See here, contact object. But then I have fixed the account IDs. And if I just click on any account, any ID, it will take me to the account object record actually. Dickinson PLC is actually record on the account object. So we have a field on contact object called account ID. So I'm going to search it with, I'm going to available make use of this. So a.id. So account ID, if it is equal to this, then fetch this particular record. So now your query will work for all account records. So I'm going to make a query like this. Then after that, I'm going to make use of this list actually. So for contact C, so this, because we have already used trigger.new, correct? So we cannot again use this. So for that, what I'm using is this, like this. So if C dot, so I'll have to check whether it is primary contact or not, correct? So for that, I am going to use is equal to fine. So if it is a primary contact, then we will have to change the phone number fields. We have to assign the account phone number field to contact, correct? So in contact, we have a phone number field like this is equal to, in account also, we have a phone number field. So I am asking the account phone number to update it to the contact phone number. So for which phone number which should get updated, if you see, finally I'll be updating the list actually. So let's check whether it is working or not. So for this particular account, I have 3 contacts. So primary, secondary. So see here, I have, I am making this as secondary. So if you see here, we have secondary contact. So only one primary contact is there. So if I'm going to change anything, so on the account object, if I change the fields, see here, only for Are you able to see the change? In this, Rahul Kumar is only the primary contact. Fine. Remaining two are secondary contacts. So now see here, the remaining fields and all remain same. Only the primary contact is getting updated with whatever I am doing it here. So here if I give, so see here, after I am saving it, see the changes made in here. So if I make a change on the account object phone number field, it is checking for the primary contact, related primary contact, and updating that also. Fine. So our trigger is working fine. So how did we write trigger name on this particular object? As the change should happen on another object, we are going for after trigger. So after update for, so for every time I am going to make a change on my account object. So account, one instance for that account, I am going to make use of trigger.new because all the new values which are going to get updated. So trigger.new. After that, as we have already used trigger.new, we have to query the list because like on contact object we have to fetch what are all the related contacts because one account can have many contacts, correct? So for that we have to fetch the what are all the contacts for that particular account and we have to keep that in one list. But we have already used trigger.new for account object. Fine, again we cannot use the same for contact object. So for that we are declaring a list and we are querying. So when you are querying, you will have to take into consideration what are all the mandatory fields. So like that it is last name. So which field we are going to update, phone number field. So what condition we are going to check whether it is a primary contact or not. So what is required actually, so those fields we have to select. So from which object. Then I am going to give one condition where in which only the related contacts should come, not all the contacts on my contact object. If I have some 55 records on my contact object, I don't want my query to return 55 records. You can say, well, what is the problem? Why should I give this one where condition? It is just 55 contacts, right? So if I just give like that, let it come. If you see, in my debug, it is actually 55 contacts. But think of in any enterprise edition or in any company, the contact object record count will be huge. Take like 55 lakhs, 65 lakhs. Then if you're writing a query like a generic query like that, then it will take so much amount of time for you to for the query to go and search all the tables and fetch all the records from the particular table. So it will take very much time. So for that, to reduce that only, always it is advisable when you are writing a query to have one where condition. Your query should be as optimizable as possible. Query optimization is good. So that is actually again it will be, once that comes out of practice, once you are down the line, if you are going to work in an development projects, as well as and when you are working on scenarios, you will come to know. But the thing to be noted here when you are writing queries is actually always you will have to use a condition so that your query returns as less number of records as possible. So we are going to query using one list for the contact object. Then we are making use of this list. For that again on for loop. So for that contact object, then instance for that contact object, then the list name actually. After that, I'm going to check whether the contact which I have got, whether it is a primary contact or not. Fine. So for that, I have given it as the condition is as like this. So after this, what is the action I want to perform? I want to update the account phone number to contact phone number. I have given it. So for which account, for which contacts I want this change? Only for the related primary contacts for this particular account. So I'm like including this line account ID. If the account ID is equal to contact, in the contact field there is one field called account ID. If it is these both are same, then do this action. After that, finally, I'm updating this list so that the phone number gets updated because in this list only we have queried the phone number field correct of the contact object. So I'm going to update the list so that whatever phone number is present here is being given to contact. So this is an example for the after update trigger actually. So I made to share yesterday's session. Actually, the recording I have shared. I made to share the visual course coding. So the visual course session, visual course, and the yesterday's effects session, visual course and effects code, and today's code. I'll share it in one word by today, so that we can make use of it. Fine. So this is about triggers actually. So the task which I am giving to you on triggers would be like try creating one trigger wherein which on account object, if the industry is education, it should not allow me to create a record actually. So we are not we are not doing business for education related industries. So for that, my system should not have the account object. My system should not allow me to uh, save the record of the account object if it is an industry specific. So on the account object, try writing a trigger wherein which if the industry is education, it should not allow me to save the record. This would be one task. Another task, if you see, whenever you create an account, a case should be created. Whenever you create an account, one opportunity should be created. So if you do this, the change should be reflected on another object, correct? So after trigger. So one task for before trigger and another task for after trigger. Try executing this, and if you face any hindrances or hiccups, let me know. I will be of assistance. So this is about triggers. So if we when a requirement comes, let it be a developer or an administrator, he should looking for all possible ways to achieve that using workflows or approval process. If at all it is not possible, then we will have to go in for triggers. Fine. So this is about triggers actually. So uh, let's wind up here for today. So after this,
What is the topic for tomorrow?
tomorrow in the tomorrow session, let's take up the test classes, yeah, moving to production, and the sequence of execution steps which are happening in the background soon after you save a record. So those topics we will cover tomorrow. Fine.
What is
So
that? That is classes and the package.
yeah, that we can do it in the next session if possible tomorrow. If not, like day after that, on Saturday, let's see. So we
Tomorrow,
have
what is the topic, Manish? It is classes and you mentioned one more.
test classes, moving to production.
Moving to production.
MTP, yeah, in short they call it as MTP. So where
Oh,
there only they will be combining about change set. So we are doing everything on the dev org, right? So in real time also
yes.
everything will be done in the sandbox. So how they will be moving from sandbox to production? So what is the process actually? So I would not be able to show that in practical, but there is a process which can be visualized actually. You can imagine. So it is that nothing, no code is involved, all configuration setups only. So because like this being a dev org, Salesforce does not provide that option. So if it is a paid version and if you have created a sandbox from that paid version, then only you
Yes.
will be able to find on the left side setup search, you will be able to find the change set actually. Your change set, if you just type in the word change set, it will be there. So outbound
Okay.
change set, inbound change set. So what is the process actually? What is being followed in the real-time scenarios when we are moving the code from sandbox to production? So there are tools actually. So if what if like if you are going to have only one org or there will be multiple orgs. Think of like you are running your organization has many Salesforce instances. In many regions you are running your Salesforce. Then for different regions you have a different org. So in such scenario you will have many Salesforce, many sandboxes. So what is the possibility to achieve like direct, is there any how to achieve DevOps actually, developer operations here in the background using that. So those kind of steps I will be able to explain the process, I will be able to explain. So you can have a knowledge on that. So once you get into any Salesforce projects, you will be able to see that in live. So that we will be saying, and then post that sequence of execution of steps.
Okay.
So after that, we'll see about integration class. the global apex class is told, right? So without manual intervention, how to integrate two systems, how to get the data from some other system and insert it into Salesforce, how to expose the data from Salesforce. So integration class we will be seeing it using SOAP methodology. So then after that, during that time, we'll get see the packages which you have seen. That is actually, if not like tomorrow itself, I can show you how to create a package from GangBoard itself.